Amazing. Brilliant to see stuff starting to come through on the chat. Hello to Philip, Jake, Sasha. You're here to learn more about the future trends and approaches to developing skills. Gosh, hopefully we'll be able to meet those objectives. Sarah, hello from PwC. Jake, Stephen, Kiara or Chiara? I don't know. I'm going to go Kiara. I hope that's right. Rohan, lovely to see you all and to meet you all. I think let's get going, shall we? Our session today is on the really important topic and quite fascinating topic of the future of digital skills. Really important area for us to be focusing on as business, as government, and as individuals in the workforce, thinking about our future and our careers. I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by such an excellent panel today. Leyla, Yildirim, Director from PwC Channel Islands. Many of you, I'm sure, will know some of these folks from the room and have seen them around the place before. Sarah Stonebridge, Head of Careers, Guernsey, and Lucy Kirby is Director of Digital Greenhouse, who we're sort of co-hosting this, delivering this with. I'm really looking forward to coming to them later on with all of their amazing knowledge to be able to share. My name's Colin Smith, if you hadn't spotted that already. I'm going to be the sort of moderator today, asking the questions, and any minute now, I'm going to be setting the scene a little bit for us. My background is marketing since the late 80s, digital since the late 90s, and delivering digital transformation kind of skills and capability development programs for the last 10 or 11 years or so, working with businesses of all different sizes through government or in the sort of corporate sphere. So hopefully I'll be a useful kind of moderator for our journey today. As I said, I'm going to set the scene in a minute, but this is not going to be all just about us. I've got some questions prepared, as you might imagine, but we want to hear your questions. So my ask of you as we go through this module is that you locate the Q&A function in Zoom. It'll be in the little navigation across the bottom, and ask questions as they come into your head. Today in the digital world, that curious advantage that we can have by wanting the answers to questions, the curiosity to understand what's coming, what's going on, to dig deeper is a fundamental digital mindset. So my ask of you is to live that. If you've already got questions, start popping them in now. But as we run through, as we ask the panelists questions, as they answer them, I'm sure it will prompt more. So just an ask for you to do so. Now, look, we all know there's been a lot of change, don't we? Certainly the last 18 months have driven a lot of significant change, but actually we've been on a consistent trajectory anyway of shifts that are taking place under our very feet. Consumers' behavior has changed. There's an epidemic of disloyalty. They have much higher and different expectations than they ever had of brands. The very nature of who our customers are, who consumers are, how they behave has shifted, and it's irreversible. They can shop the world. There's lots of brands have moved into this space with kind of more direct to consumer offerings, really accelerated over the last 18 months. And what we stand for as organizations also really, really matters to consumers. What all of this means is that the skills that have made us successful in the past, frankly, won't cut it in the future. We need to be preparing already for the skill shifts we need to be able to meet the needs of consumers, meet the needs of our business. Now, many businesses over the last 18 months, they've really not survived. They've struggled enormously, but others have adapted brilliantly. According to McKinsey, companies acted 20 to 25 times faster than expected in adapting to everything that was going on during the pandemic. 45% of them are increasing their focus on digital transformation, and companies' adoption of digital technologies accelerated during that time period, 3 to 4 years. Regardless of the reality in your environment, the relatively minimized impact of COVID in Guernsey, you will get left behind if you don't adapt the way that businesses are adapting in the rest of the world. And consumer behavior is changing regardless. Now, Avado, company that I'm representing today and work with regularly, recognized this some time ago, actually, even before the pandemic, and last year released their Beyond Skills study, which was an effort to assess the capability gaps across a range of industries, across a range of regions, and there were some really stark findings in there. One of them, in particular, those businesses said in almost all sectors, there's a vast imbalance between the capabilities their businesses need and the ones they actually had. In fact, the CEO of Avado made this statement, part of the pack that's sent out. We're now at a point where the term skills gap really isn't enough. It's more likely we should be talking about it as a capability chasm. As business, as government, as individuals, we should all be thinking about this shift that we need to make. Business leaders, we should be thinking we have a group of employees capable of doing something today. How can we ensure they're able to do something different tomorrow? And what is that different? What are some of the things that we might be talking about? I'm going to unpack those with the panel in a short while. But of course, one of them is a digital consumer or people first strategy. That's just table stakes. Being adaptable and agile, having an experimental mindset and culture within the organization, putting the consumer at the heart of our thinking and understanding the demands and expectations, how to deliver delightful experiences for them, and leveraging the value and the opportunities that data provides. And when we look at the workforce themselves, the individuals in this mix, we can see that they recognize this change. They're worried about change from jobs being put at risk due to automation. They recognize that their careers are going to have a very different path from the way they are before. That sort of stable long-term employment is probably going to be replaced by multiple careers through our lifetime, which means they know they need to learn new skills. They need to retrain. They need to upskill in that area. But there's also a recognition that technology isn't going to replace human beings. So what are the skills that human beings are going to need in this new world as that change continues? So I'd like to get a quick feel from all of you. And by the way, Jake, brilliant. First question. Nice to see. I want to see those and we want to build those up. So I'd like to get a feel from all of you. And I'm going to ask Ben, who's looking after us in the background from Digital Guernsey, to load up the poll, please, for everyone. And the question, as you can see on screen, is how well do you feel like your organization today knows its own skill gaps? And you'll see we've got a span where 1 is we don't know for certain, and 5 is we know what gaps to fill. So can I give you 30 seconds now? You should be able to have found that. Let us know in the chat if you can't find the poll. Give us your scores on there. While that's happening, I'm going to say hello to Natalie from PwC, Jenny, hello, and Julia from Morrison's. Good to have you with us. Kind of missed you at the beginning there. So we can't vote, by the way, so it's all over to you guys. So I'm going to give you now, I think, 10 more seconds. And Ben, if you think we've got a decent proportion of the audience having responded, please push them live in 3, 2, 1. Let's see what we've got. Where's the results? There we go. Okay, so looking across the spectrum of the answers that we've had, nobody has said we don't know for certain. Phew, good, it's a good start. When we look further up, we've got 70% of you who responded here are in the 2 and 3 kind of area. So there's it's not like we don't know, but maybe there's not a great deal of certainty in that mix. Only 10% of the audience, lots of confidence about exactly what gaps to fill. So we've got perhaps a recognition that there are gaps, maybe not necessarily always in every scenario, absolute clarity on what that looks like. So thank you, by the way, for your submissions there. That's great. So we know that capability building is key. We know that it's important. 80% of business leaders said that capability building is at the top of their list, extremely or very important. By the way, that same stat was 58% before the pandemic. And many of those businesses are either maintaining or increasing their investment in this in this area. So if you look around your competitive set, you're going to be seeing people making shifts. And if you can look at your business and think we're not making those shifts, or we're not making them fast enough, that should be a reason, a call to action, a call to arms. When we asked business leaders, when Deloitte asked business leaders, what were the priorities for your business in terms of preparing for future work, the top two were culture and workforce capability. And I think it's really interesting there that pulling out upskilling, reskilling, and mobility. Many businesses, and this is my last bit before I hand over to the panel, many of these businesses, they start with hiring. Around about 43% of businesses in the Beyond Skills study said that their way of solving their capability gap or skills gaps issues was through hiring, when actually the numbers show that reskilling is much more beneficial. It pays much more over the long term, and it can drive productivity uplift in multiple areas. So I hope that's nicely set the scene for our conversation. I've already mentioned the amazing panelists that we've got, Leyla, Sarah, and Lucy. I'm going to start by asking Leyla. So the report, the PwC Future Skills in the Channel Islands that you released last year, can you remind everyone and bring them up to date? I'm sure many of them have read it. Bring us all up to speed on what it covered and what its findings were.
Sure, thank you, Colin, and very happy to be here today. So the key finding from our survey was that 30% of jobs are at risk of being replaced completely or changed dramatically due to automation between now and 2035. And when we turn that into numbers of jobs, that's over 27,000 jobs in the Channel Islands, 10,800 of those in Guernsey. We found that financial services is one of the sectors that is going to be most at risk. And why is that? Well, that's because a lot of what we do in FS is around managing and processing data and information. And in the future, technology will be able to do that much more efficiently, faster, and better than humans can. But it's not just financial services. There are a number of industries that will be affected. And particularly, we felt the young and those who are in lower paid and lower skilled jobs really at risk. And that risks widening this kind of social divide, or we're calling it the digital divide. We had said that a lot of the job impact would be felt between 2025 and 2030. But in fact, as you just said in your opener, Colin, we're seeing a lot of that timetable be accelerated because of the pandemic. But look, it's not all doom and gloom, because we were really keen to stress in the report that there's also a huge opportunity for Guernsey and Jersey here, because if we get ahead of the curve and start upskilling the workforce now, then we could position the islands as a digital talent hub.
Fabulous, Leyla, thank you. Good to bring us all up to speed. And I like the positive angle at the end there. Over the last year, so it's about a year ago, wasn't it, that you released the report? What's your reflections on where we are? Have people acted? Have you seen good progress? Or have things accelerated or changed since it was released?
Well, look, Colin, absolutely, we're seeing things accelerate much faster than we even predicted. You know, as you said at the opening, businesses have had to adopt technology so quickly, and they're seeing how they're able to do business much better and more efficiently using technology than perhaps they would have realized. And there's just there's no realistic scenario where we're going to wind the clock back and go back to old ways of working. The genie is now out of the bottle. We're seeing demand in our Guernsey market for certain roles falling off a cliff. So PA roles, certain admin type roles, there just isn't the demand that there once was. At the same time, we're seeing demand for those kind of tech type roles, so data analysts, digital marketers, really increasing very rapidly. But what recruitment firms are telling us is that the pool of talent for those jobs has shrunk to a puddle. Now, if we kind of take a step back and look at global trends, we're seeing this big phenomenon called the Great Resignation. And you alluded to it in your opener. This is where we've got built up demand because people have been stuck in jobs through the pandemic with maybe less ability to switch careers or move jobs, but also a lot of people thinking, actually, I want to change or I want to do something different with my career. So we're starting to see mass numbers of people resigning and quitting jobs. And what all that means for us here in Guernsey is that even if you've got talent in your business with the right digital mindset and the skills for the future, hanging on to those people is going to be really difficult. And you're just not going to be able to hire your way out of this problem because there just isn't the pool of people available to fill those gaps. So really that emphasis on upskilling your staff is even more important and even more urgent than I'd say it was 12 months ago when we released the report.
Okay, thanks, Leyla. Sobering stuff. So I'd like actually to hear on that topic from Lucy and Sarah. Can you share your perspective on where we are right now? And I think, should we start with Sarah? Over to you first.
Yeah, thank you, Colin, and hi, everybody. Yes, and following on from Leyla's point there, individuals really, as an employee or somebody out of the workforce, you really need to take account now of your career and skills development as much as you take account of your health and well-being and looking after yourself in that way. As Leyla and Colin have said already, everything has accelerated forwards and things are changing right now. This whole notion of future of work is here. And employees, existing employees and potential workforce really need to embrace that notion of it's not about survival anymore in this sort of pandemic and COVID. It's about capabilities. How can I show I've got those capabilities? How can I improve my capabilities? Whether that's within an existing employer and speaking to them, or it's yourself as an individual being proactive about it. I think as well, when you consider the longer working lives idea, and Colin, you alluded to it at the beginning about people realizing they're not going to stay in careers for a long term, that one career or job, and how you make yourself adaptable, agile, resilient to change, and the proactive approach to career and skills development is really quite key. And I don't think, generally as a population and a community, people have embraced that. They kind of perhaps see that as things they used to do at school, get ready for the workplace. I'm in the workplace, loving my job and getting on with a bit of training and development, but actually I need to be a capable worker that can manage all these shifts and changes coming, which are unpredictable still. We don't still know lots about the future that's coming. So it's certainly from my perspective, from our careers support that we offer, we have seen individuals, as Leyla mentioned, about this sort of great resignation where people have reflected on work-life balance, the way they work, the type of work they do, and wanting to review their situation. So it's starting to happen here, but I think that cultural shift of, my career and skills development is really quite important and necessary in my life now. It's not just something that happened when I was at school and the first bit of my career. It's ongoing, it's lifelong. So that's definitely something that, we've picked up on in careers.
Yeah, I really recognize that, Sarah. That sort of, we need to recognize that it's, as you said, the moment you leave university, college, school, it's not over. There is no homecoming. We are now in a lifetime of learning, and actually organizations and government have a responsibility to support that expectation. And you might have heard people talk about being a learning organization. That's the mindset we need to take in when we're thinking about businesses. Lucy, over to you in the same thing. Have you got anything to add on all of that good stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what's really interesting is at the Digital Greenhouse, we're starting to see sort of the product of some of these changes. So I think to Sarah's point, we're seeing people who are starting to realize that they need to reskill, upskill, change direction. I think there's been a lot of challenges and negatives with the pandemic, but I think for some people, a positive that has come out is that reconsidering of where do they want to go with their careers, what's of interest to them, what are they looking for within the employment environment. I think that's probably a challenge for some of our organisations, not just within the Channel Islands, but worldwide. People have got more choice, so they can think about working for anybody really across the world now, not just their local employers. So it is a challenge for business. I think from an upskilling perspective, we're seeing absolutely a growth in adoption around courses and programs in digital marketing, data analytics, business analysis. Those are absolutely the areas that are growing. But I think what's interesting with it is it's the accessibility of the upskilling programs that's really important. So if you're out of a formal school environment, if you're maybe already sort of 15, 20 years into employment, upskilling can't look the same as when you maybe did your original chunk of education. It needs to be flexible. It needs to fit around probably a very long list of competing priorities. So we're seeing some really interesting growth in adoption of the types of programs that are flexible, that are digital first, but that are also global, because I think people are recognizing, particularly I think within the Channel Islands, where we have had a period of being quite sort of remote, of wanting to connect with learners and people from business who are across the world. So they want to globalize their learning as well as upskill themselves.
Love it, Lucy, thank you. There's a couple of things I just want to pick up on there. So one, you were talking about individuals and the choices they make around the kind of type of organizations they join. I read something the other day that Generation Z, Gen Z, whatever we call them, the kind of youngest generation coming through into the workforce, are disproportionately favoring roles in climate change and sustainability, showing that sort of values piece coming through, that how they think through where am I going to invest my my efforts over the years. And I just want to pick up as well on your point about learning approaches. So it might be that some of the businesses here are thinking, right, we need a learning program of some kind. It might not be that a set of workshops face-to-face in the good old style is the right way to do it. Sometimes it might be, but it's the blend, as you were saying, Lucy, I think, providing that learning in a way that allows the accessibility, allows it to fit into people's workday or their lives, that is really, really important. Lovely, thank you. So before we go on to the next couple of questions, I've got another poll for you. So Ben, if you wouldn't mind loading up that other poll, I'd really like to get a feeling for this. Leyla mentioned that kind of balance between hiring versus reskilling or upskilling. So I'd like your thoughts on this one. So when you think about your business currently and it's the steps it's taking, which of these approaches are more likely to be used to upskill and improve the capability of the organization? You'll see we've got hiring, redeployment of existing employees, reskilling and upskilling existing employees. So for me, by the way, on a definition, reskilling is finding someone in a completely different role, giving them the skills to do something new. Upskilling, in my head, and correct me if I'm wrong, panelists, is giving someone additional skills to be able to do their current role more effectively and sort of taking advantage of all the new stuff that's around. Thumbs up on that, great. So I'm going to give 20 more seconds for responses here. And then it'll be interesting to see. And panelists, if there are any comments you have on the results, I'm going to pause for a little bit and allow you to make any comments, whether that reflects what you've seen, whether you've got any thoughts about the results and what it might mean for those attendees and Guernsey. So let's give 5 more seconds. I think that's 20, isn't it? 4, 3, 2, 1. And Ben, over to you to post the results. And here we go. Oh, so there's a good old split there, isn't it? Almost even across all. Upskilling seems to be bearing out that quite well, so that's great. So let's say, using an example there, somebody who's a marketer who understands traditional marketing, upskilling them into understanding the digital skills might be in that characteristic there. Hiring, no surprise, actually 41% of you. Remember I mentioned earlier, 43% was the result of the Beyond Skills study. So quite similar. We're seeing a sort of a mixy approach, which is a bit reflected here. It's kind of, well, let's do some upskilling and some reskilling and some hiring to fill those gaps. But I guess just panelists, have you got any thoughts about this in relation to our audience today? Sarah's nodding. I think over to you, Sarah.
Yeah, it was I suppose it's the sense of what's the immediate need, and you might need the new hires in to solve that, as well as investing in the upskilling, reskilling, which takes time to come to fruition. And Leyla will probably have an insight to that, where that's, you know, you'll reap the rewards of that in time, but you may still have an immediate need for the hiring.
And Leyla, you mentioned the talent pool before. I guess something you mentioned was actually hiring in the talent is going to get harder and harder.
Yeah, I think that's right. And, you know, another concern really is that it's just much cheaper to upskill staff you've already got who know your business, who know your clients, who understand the culture of the organization and the way things work. So it's much more cost effective to upskill people you already have, rather than trying to hire people in from a market that we know is very, very competitive. In the report we did last year, we also showed that, you know, at a macro level, it's 6 times cheaper to upskill people than it is when we compare to the cost to the economy of people losing jobs, having periods out of work, then having to retrain potentially before they come back into the workforce. So it's just a no-brainer.
Yeah, thanks for that build, Leyla. Brilliant. So food for thought for those of you in the audience. Thanks for your submissions there. Great to see, great to get a feel for that there. Now, how are we doing on time? We're doing very well, actually. So I've got a couple more questions I'd like to ask the panel, and then I see that we've got some great questions coming in here, which is brilliant. And I also see, Pete, you popped a question in the chat, so we'll note that when we're going through those questions in there. But some of you touched on this a little bit. Lucy touched on it a little bit. What skills are we talking about here? And Sarah, I think I'd like to start with you on this one. What skills are you seeing as being the kind of biggest gaps, and also the most obvious things we need to be thinking about to build the capability that we need? Oh, and you're on mute, by the way.
Sorry about that. The obviously the digital skills piece is quite clear, and I think people have grasped that. But I think we've all alluded to it. You know, the human element of skill and capability is not entirely replaced by digital, and so you know, the innovation, analytical skills, critical thinking, analysis, leadership. You know, there's a lot of skills, and Leyla will be able to give an insight from PwC's, you know, findings. It's a lot of resilience and flexibility as well, and as we were saying, you know, people have been used to coming out of education, joining a job, feeling secure in that, and it's adapting, you know, that skill set to meet the digital requirements, but also the how do I need to operate as an employee now to be agile and flexible and innovative thinking, problem solving, you know. And that's not to say people don't have some of those things now, but they perhaps haven't realized or been aware of their true potential in that, because they're not working in a role that embraces that yet. So I guess there's a piece where, from a skills audit perspective of your existing staff and their aptitude for certain things, allows you to get a view of your landscape and what skills will be needed. But definitely the sort of human capabilities and capturing those skills against the digital requirement. You know, I know Leyla's mentioned it as well before, that it's not to replace humans, it's making sure they've got those skills, and I'm sure the business leaders here today will be starting to think like that anyway.
Brilliant, thanks, Sarah. And Lucy, how about any thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what's really interesting is when we think about skills, often we jump straight to thinking about courses. So we'll think about, is it a particular qualification? Is it a particular course that needs to be offered, whether that's at a school or a college or virtually or whatever it might be? I think the greatest challenge I would say we're facing locally, back to something that's been reiterated across the panel today, is the cultural change and the mindset shift that we need to have around upskilling and around reskilling. So I think from a skills perspective, what we're not going to see in the future is a lack of change. So I think if there's one thing that we can all completely agree on, is that we're just going to see more accelerated change in this space. So trying to fix a 20-year vision with a very short list of particular crunchy hard skills or courses that people need to do is just no longer going to be the case. And if we think about that in sort of education terms, I think the national curriculum was written by a group of MPs round a table, sort of however many years ago, literally on the back of probably a cigarette box at the time, but on the back of a coaster, based on what they'd done when they were at Eton. That's not going to cut it moving forwards. So I think we need to really think about that resilience, the ability for people to take control of where they're going with their careers. But we definitely see that there are some indicators, particularly around digital, around the use of data, and connecting those into the ability to be creative again. And I think actually that comes down to leadership. So do we have the right leaders in our organizations who are willing to allow their teams or encourage their teams to be creative, to think differently, to apply their skills differently, to solve the challenges of the future? It's a very different model to maybe where we've been previously, which has maybe been a bit more of a very structured pathway into particular careers that don't move, that don't change, linear qualifications, and then a hierarchical structure within the business.
Yeah, and then as that function ceases to be relevant or changes drastically, then those people in that track, suddenly, where are they going to go? Where are they going to go? Thank you, Lucy. Leyla, I know you've got some strong thoughts on this one.
Yeah, so look, I think it really depends to some extent what industry you're in as to what technologies and what skills your employees need to have. So if I think of us in PwC, where the kind of work we're doing for clients involves managing lots of complex data sets, we've trained every member of staff in the use of Alteryx. And Alteryx is like Excel on steroids. It's a very sophisticated ability to build workflows that manage data and process data really well. And aligned to that, there's another tool that we've, again, upskilled everyone in called Tableau, which is around how you visualize that data and create insights that are going to be useful to our clients. Now, that doesn't mean that I need to become an in-depth expert in that technology, but what I do need to know is the ability of that technology to help solve problems for our clients. And I think this, to build on Lucy's point around that mindset piece, we don't know in 2035 what technology we're all going to be using. In fact, the technology that we're using today in our business, and those two that I just mentioned, may well be defunct by then. But almost that doesn't matter, because if we've got employees who are comfortable with technology and have got the right agile mindset to know its capability to solve problems, then that's really the most important piece. And I think it's getting people comfortable with and understanding the potential of technology to improve the way we work and the way we do business.
Leyla, love that point. Thank you. So the skills gap. So there's clearly something coming through here about the digital aspect of it, and I'm also picking up that sort of soft skills area, the analytical skills, the resilience, the leadership kind of aspect. So we need a combination of all those. And in fact, if technology and automation is what's is what we're talking about being one of the significant changing factors, then we can see there that that's leaning into more the mindset, well, the human critical mind and creativity that Lucy mentioned can bring to the party. Okay, so one last question, I think, from me before we hand over to some of the great questions that are coming in from the audience. And this is for all of you. Well, of course it is, but anyway, whoever would like to jump in first, I'm going to let you wave and then choose you. So who's responsible for taking the lead here? Is this a government issue? Is it a business issue? Is it an issue for the individuals? Who'd like to go first? Wave at me. Yes, Leyla's in there. First hand up.
Well, look, Colin, I've got very strong views on this because I feel it needs to be a community-wide effort. There's no single business that can solve this themselves. It's got to be a combination of government, education, and business coming together to really solve the issue. I do feel very strongly that it should be government-led, but that all of those stakeholders need to be involved and need to be playing a part in this to solve the issue together. And I think, dare I say it, but I feel that Jersey is ahead of us in terms of the progress they've made in bringing those stakeholders together. And they're already very clear about, for the different industries on the island, what the future skill needs are. That conversation between business and government is already happening about the best way to address that. And the collaboration with education and Digital Jersey is there as well. So it's that combined effort is really critical, but government-led and sponsored is key.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. Sarah, anything to add on that?
Yeah, agree with Leyla there. And our obviously Guernsey government work plan that was recently debated, before the summer, secured a move to have a skills strategy or human capital plan for the island on the bailiwick. And it's much needed, as Leyla said. Guernsey needs with business to have a look at what future skills are needed, mapping out. And I noticed in that Singapore do the transformation maps, where exactly that Leyla said. Education, business, and government have come together to map out what different sector skill needs are going to be in 5, 10, 15 years time, which I think is really key, because information and awareness about what's needed for everybody is really critical to be able to make the plans. But that overarching lead from government about the skills strategy, because it crosses over into so many other government work streams of housing. Where would you want people to stay in here and work and live here? You've got population management, you've got health and well-being. You've got the secondary transformation and post-16 here in the islands, and going through a massive change. So it does map across to lots of other government work streams, and so the government work plan really is the driver for that, and to have that lead from government. But it needs to work at pace, as Leyla said. It's much needed here. So we hope to see that moving forward quickly. Amazing. I know Sasha's on the call here as well today as a participant. Yeah. So she may have a view as a government politician.
Yeah, and she's asked a question as well. I'm going to come to that second now, as soon as Lucy has. Have you got anything to add, Lucy?
Yeah, absolutely. I think to echo everyone else's comments, it's absolutely a cross-community drive that is required. This isn't just about one sector. So whilst we've talked quite heavily about the finance sector, every single career, every single job role, every sector in the island is being affected by this. There is literally no area that you can think of that it's not being affected by digitization, but also by the challenges of recruitment, and the challenges specifically when you've got a very small sort of landlocked island environment. I think from a government perspective, what I would absolutely love to see is that we also know that public sector, as one of the largest employers in the island, but also internationally, public sector are facing some very serious challenges around their own upskilling. So actually to be able to, it would be fantastic to be sort of sector leading and leading the way from a government perspective about how we can work with pilots and develop programs to support our public sector alongside our private sector to really show how this can be done across an organisation.
Great. So that sets me up nicely to lean into Sasha's question. In fact, she's given more than one, but the first one, who's going to fund this? How do we fund this mass upskilling revolution? And I think the build on that is, are you aware of any other kind of levers or any other programs where there might be good work going on? Sarah, you mentioned Singapore, but it's open to anyone to kind of comment. Anybody got any thoughts on that question from Sasha?
Yeah, so I could start that off. So we've, as Sasha knows, we have worked with the government of Luxembourg on putting a mass upskilling program in place for Luxembourg. That's been underway for some years now. We're also heavily involved in that Singapore example and a number of other jurisdictions around the world too. I think the way we've seen this work best is where there is some government funding to support that initial piece around doing the work on establishing what the need is for the jurisdiction, and doing that kind of skills match between what capabilities we have and what we're going to need tomorrow and what the gap looks like. But beyond that, absolutely, this should be a combined effort involving business as well. And I think, most business have the pounds willing to invest in this area, but maybe haven't got to the point where they've got their own workforce strategy of the future yet. So, I think there are levers, there are incentives that we can look at, which, we would love to do, and we can learn from other jurisdictions as well. But where we've seen this be most successful is when it's begun with some government funding. And I think, it's fantastic that, and I know Sasha's worked incredibly hard to make sure skills was part of that work plan. And I know she's pushed that really hard, and that's fantastic. But without the resources and the investment to turn that into something real, I've got a little bit of a worry that we might struggle to make some progress fast enough.
Yeah. Thanks, Leyla. And Lucy, Sarah, if you've got nothing to add to that, then fine. If you do, I'm going to give you a second now to start speaking.
I'll just give you a really quick one on that. I think just to reflect that what we've found, we've been in the position over the last year where we've been able to provide funded upskilling programs through the Digital Greenhouse. And that actually has made such a huge difference, because we're able to target not just the large companies who have got an L&D budget, but we can really target those SMEs who otherwise may really struggle. So I think the targeted funding into accessible programs in the right areas is absolutely essential.
Brilliant, thank you. And Sarah, I'm going to guess you're not like leaning forward or waving at me, so I'm going to guess enough on that one. Just one last one on this kind of topic, which is kind of indirectly related, is Pete in the chat asked, what are schools doing about this? So I don't know if that's something that any of you are qualified to talk to. Have you seen any good work going on? What are the schools doing to support the skills shift that we need? Lucy.
Yeah. So I think, well, we can embarrass Leyla with a fantastic program that PwC have introduced over the last year to support particular primary schools with their computational thinking, really getting coding into the primary schools in a way that we've just not been able to offer. And again, that comes down to sort of resource, and it's been great to see PwC step in to provide that support. And I think the other thing that schools are doing, our formal education environments, is I'm really pleased to see a much more increase in reaching out to industry. So from a Digital Greenhouse perspective, we're able to do a lot more of the sort of digital innovation programs, working with other companies, bringing companies into the schools. I think that's so important from a mind shift perspective, to get young people thinking not just tech is something you do in an IT class, or digital is about Excel and Word, but actually it's about innovation, it's about agile thinking, because the more we can do that creative thinking at a younger age, the more those people are going to come into the work environment ready to work in that kind of way.
Lovely, thanks, Lucy. And Leyla, were you going to talk about the exact same thing?
Yeah, and thanks for the plug, Lucy. I think the success of that program has been as much about upskilling the teachers as it has been about upskilling the pupils. And what we found initially is teachers are quite not all teachers, but many are quite worried about the idea of having to deliver some sessions on coding or creating algorithms. So investing that time to get teachers comfortable has been so refreshing, because what it means now is that they've got the confidence to now bring that into the classroom, on a routine basis rather than just as part of an ICT session. And we've got much greater plans to bring that into secondary schools as well. But we've not done this in isolation. It's been very much hand in hand with Victor Lane, who leads digital for education on the island, and we've done the same in Jersey. So I think that's one example, but to us that's kind of filling a bit of a hole, but something we need to be doing on a much wider scale. And we've invested as a firm quite a significant amount in it already, and we've just got to make that sustainable for the long term.
Lovely, thank you. And Sarah, anything to add on that one? Yep, there's a wave.
Yeah, just picking up on the young people and the teachers element. There's also the parent and carer sort of role in updating themselves, being aware of what's coming really for their child, and just making sure that they're aware of jobs for the future, what skills and everything. That's another piece for education as well. It's not just the young people, but the teachers and the parents, carers being up to date with everything. And I think, like Leyla said, it's tech across the curriculum. And Lucy touched on it, not just in the ICT lesson. Every subject can pull in the tech element into their lesson. And also from a careers perspective, it's connecting a young person's learning to the world of work and to careers. That's really quite key, because from a young person perspective, realizing why they're learning what they're learning, and how it's really important in the workplace or in different industries and sectors, their motivation for learning, and they're wanting and they aspire to it, they want to do it. If they can connect it with what that looks like in for their future, if they're heading that way into the world of work, they want to know, why am I doing this, why am I learning this? So they want that connection. And like Lucy said, the links with industry and schools being able to partner with industries as well is really brilliant, because young people having employers in the room and not a teacher telling them that is really powerful for them. So that's really, and I think the education curriculum, as time goes on, it's adapting and flexing as best it can. And obviously subject exam boards are looking at syllabuses, and but from a teacher practitioner perspective, it is being innovative with the use of tech in your classroom as well. And there's also a piece around females into tech, and I know all of us on the panel are aware that it can be an area of low aspiration from a career perspective from females looking at tech. So there's a piece of work to perhaps happen there as well. But yes, definitely there's a role within education and curriculum.
Excellent, fantastic answers, thank you. I hope who's that, Pete, was it, that you found that one helpful. So there's two questions relating to skills and capability. So Jake asked, what is the difference? And then somebody else commented, I'm not actually sure that the majority of businesses fully understand skills and capabilities and what they will need for the future. So can we just answer that first one? For you, do any of you have a strong view on what do we mean by skills and capabilities? Is there a difference between the two? Any thoughts there? And if not, I can jump in because I've got a thought here.
Yeah, I'd jump into that one. I mean, I would define skills and capabilities. The difference between skills being what you're learning, what you've got your if you like, a new knowledge, and the capability is whether or not you're then able to apply it. Because I think it's not as clean as that, but I think the skills piece, you can often, I think actually Sarah's comment just before, you can create something in quite an artificial environment. We're going to learn to code on a Monday over here, if it's not then in some way connected to a useful productive work environment or personal life environment, it can be a bit tokenistic and not really have the impact. So I think then the capability is having the ability to take those skills and apply them in a way that's going to effectively address the challenges at hand.
Totally agree. Anybody got anything to add on that? So Lucy, I'm just going to build on that. I absolutely think you're right. It's how the skills are applied in the environment, with the organization structured in such a way to enable those skills to be able to deliver the results that the business needs. Yeah, so we could all sit around with the skills and not actually deliver them. As you said, they're not actually applied. Great. But then there was, I'm just going to go back to the, I'm not certain, I don't know if it was a comment from Pete or a question. I think it was a comment. So Pete, thanks. Let's move on from that one. I've got one. I'm going to ask one more question from the audience, and then we're going to do wrapping up. And we'll need to answer this one relatively quickly, just because we've got so many. So Chiara asked, do we think the future of the workforce is kind of jack of all trades, generalist skill set, or niche expertise? Anybody on the panel got strong thoughts on this?
Yeah, well, look, I think it's not an either or, because I think there is room for both, you know, so there will be still a need for those deep technical experts, you know, those data scientists, engineers for the future, absolutely. But I think for everybody, that need to have that broader digital mindset will apply, no matter what role you're in, no matter what industry you're in. So I genuinely don't think it's an either or.
Thank you, Leyla. Anyone else?
Yeah, I'd just add in there, I think we could go back to, and I know Phil's just put in the chat, putting in a bit of theory there, but the theory of the T-shaped individual. So you've got your sort of more generalist skills across the top, your broader knowledge, your understanding, your behaviors, your ability to work within the culture, and softer skills, but then you've probably got a level of deep dive. To Leyla's comment about, you know, it might be that you still have a specialism in marketing or in data or whatever it might be, but there's going to be a certain level of breadth that people will need to have across all roles.
Love it. Thank you. Sarah, anything to add there? No. Lovely, guys. And apologies to anyone else who's commented or put any questions in here that we haven't had a chance to get to. But I do have one question with our remaining 5 minutes that I'd like to ask of the panel. And I'm going to direct one question, but slightly different to each of you. So I'm going to start with Leyla. And this is all about what should we be doing now? And I'd like you to answer specifically about businesses. What should businesses be doing right now?
Well, I think first and foremost, you need to create that strategic workforce plan. You need to understand what your business is going to be doing in 3 years, in 5 years, and what resources and skills you're going to need in order to do that. Once you've got that, the next piece is having a look at what skills you've got today, and in doing that, what's the gap between the two? And that's where you get the beginnings of your upskilling program. Now, I think one of the other things is you've got to bake in enough time for people to upskill, because you can't be expecting them to do this as well as the day job on top. So it's really important that you allocate that time for people to upskill the tools in the tools and the tech that you're going to need for the future. I know a lot of businesses are struggling with that. We're helping a number of organizations on that workforce planning piece. For many businesses, they've never really had to do anything like that before, because the model has been pretty much the same for the last 30 or so years. So having to really look forward and think, how do I stay competitive? And what am I going to need to change in my business in order to do that? And then that skills piece and resources to support it is something quite new for a lot of firms. So I would say that's the top priority for business.
Thank you, Leyla. Brilliant. So I'm going to take that same question and I'm going to go to Lucy, and I'm going to ask you, what should individuals in the workforce be thinking about doing right now?
So I think if you're sort of listening to this call, or you're thinking, right, I'm going back to my team, what's my sort of call to arms? I think there are some great programs out there at the moment. We've been really pleased to be running some fully funded programs over the course of the rest of this year and into next year. There's a lot of accessible, easy to access courses that you can pick up very easily to start to upskill yourself. It's not something, I think digital changes is not something to be scared of. It's really something we should be embracing. But I think we need people to have that digital leadership. So I think if you are on this call, if you're sharing this information and you are a leader within an organization, that might be a manager of a team or higher up within your business itself, I think you've got to really think about how you can support your team to start to, it's not doing it all in one go, but to start to think about where are the opportunities to upskill, where can you get involved, and start to pick up some new skills.
Lovely. Thank you, Lucy. And Sarah, you can see where this is going, I'm sure, and everybody else. So that very last question to you, what should government be doing right now to support this whole thing?
Well, the government work plan skills strategy, moving on with that really at pace. That's the absolutely massive key piece of work, I think, that needs to be done to help map out the vision and the future for the bailiwick, which then businesses can use to cascade down where they're heading as well. But it's that skills strategy piece is a piece that needs to be worked on with business. It's not just the government saying in its isolation. And certainly, there's been some really good relationships being built between business and government to start those conversations, but it does have to happen at pace now. It needs to really be worked on, it needs to be produced, it needs to be clear to people what the skills strategy is for the bailiwick, and how that cascades across all the other work streams of government, because without a skills strategy, your population management regime changes completely. Your health and well-being strategies change completely, because as we all know, the well-being of people in the workplace is really quite critical. And there's been surveys that have said, people are feeling, stressed and anxious about their futures, and since COVID as well. So that government piece on the skills strategy needs to move now and at pace. There's certainly action being taken to do that, but it cascades across the other things as well. It can't just be done in isolation.
Excellent. Sarah, Lucy, Leyla, thank you so much for your contributions. I hope the whole of the audience have found them valuable. It's been a really in-depth conversation, lots of topics covered, which hopefully have given everyone some inspiration. Everyone who's still with us now, I hope you are still here. You'll notice that Ben has popped a little link in the chat there about some workshops that you might be able to explore. Lots of stuff going in there now, but I think it's probably time for us to let you all go. Thanks again, Sarah, Lucy and Leyla. Thanks to everyone for joining us. Take care and best of luck with your upskilling and reskilling plans for the future. Thanks all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.